To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Quiet Life. James Summers pushed his cleaning cart down the sterile hallway of Riverside Elementary, his weathered hands gripping the handle with practiced ease. At 62, he moved with the measured precision of a man who'd spent decades in hostile territories, though most people saw only a gray-haired janitor in a blue uniform. The morning sun filtered through the school's windows as children's laughter echoed from classrooms. James paused outside room 3B, watching his 9-year-old granddaughter Jamie Summers through the glass. Her auburn hair caught the light as she raised her hand enthusiastically, answering her teacher's question about multiplication tables. "She's brilliant, that one," came a voice behind him. Mrs. Patterson, the principal, approached with a warm smile. "Takes after her grandfather's discipline, I'd say." James nodded, his gray eyes softening. "Her grandmother's brains, my stubbornness." What Mrs. Patterson didn't know was that James Summers had once been Staff Sergeant James "Ghost" Summers, one of the most decorated snipers in Navy SEAL history. 25 years of service across 3 continents, 847 confirmed kills, and operations so classified they existed only in encrypted files buried deep in Pentagon databases. His transition to civilian life hadn't been smooth. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way his hand automatically reached for weapons that weren't there, it had cost him his marriage to Sarah. But Jamie had changed everything. When his daughter Lisa died in a car accident 3 years ago, James had stepped up to raise his granddaughter. The janitorial job at her school let him stay close, watch over her, and slowly heal the wounds that decades of warfare had carved into his soul. "Grandpa Joe," Jamie's voice rang out as the lunch bell sounded. She burst through the classroom door, backpack bouncing as she ran to him. The nickname had stuck since she was 4. She couldn't pronounce James properly. "How was math class, kiddo?" "Easy. Mrs. Rodriguez says I might skip ahead next year." Her bright green eyes, so much like her mother's, sparkled with pride. James felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the fierce protectiveness that had replaced his warrior's instincts. This little girl was his world now, his redemption, his reason for choosing life over the darkness that had claimed too many of his brothers in arms. As they walked to the cafeteria, James's trained eye automatically scanned exits, assessed potential threats, cataloged faces. Old habits died hard. He'd chosen this quiet life deliberately. Millbrook was a small town in Montana, far from the chaos of his past. Here, the biggest threats were scraped knees and homework deadlines. That afternoon, as James finished mopping the gymnasium, his phone buzzed. The number was unknown, but the voice that answered when he picked up was one he recognized, his former commanding officer, Admiral William Cox. "Ghost, we need to talk." "I'm retired, Admiral. Have been for 8 years. "I know. This isn't about that. We've got intelligence suggesting Santiago Pierce's organization has expanded into the northwestern states. Millbrook specifically." James's blood chilled. Santiago Pierce, a name that carried weight in certain circles. The Sinaloa Cartel's most vicious lieutenant, known for his theatrical cruelty and strategic brilliance. During James's final mission in Mexico, Pierce had been their primary target. The operation had been compromised, resulting in the deaths of 3 SEALs. Pierce had escaped, but not before James had put a bullet through his shoulder, leaving him permanently disabled. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he knows you're there, Ghost. Our sources say he's been planning something. Call it professional courtesy. You might want to consider relocating." James watched Jamie through the window, innocently swinging on the playground equipment. "I'm not running anymore, sir. This is home. I figured you'd say that. Just watch your 6, soldier." That evening, as James helped Jamie with her homework at their small kitchen table, he found himself studying shadows differently, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The house felt different somehow, less like a sanctuary, more like a position to defend. "Grandpa Joe, you're being weird," Jamie observed, looking up from her science project about volcanoes. "Just thinking, sweetheart, about the old days." Sometimes her perceptiveness startled him. What makes you say that? You get that look. Mom used to get it too when she talked about Daddy before he died. Jamie's father had been a Marine, killed in Afghanistan when she was 3. The sad but angry look. James reached across the table and squeezed her small hand. I'm not going anywhere, Jamie. I promise you that. She smiled and returned to her volcano, carefully measuring baking soda. James watched her work, memorizing every detail. The way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how she hummed tunelessly under her breath, the small scar on her chin from a bicycle accident the previous summer. As he tucked her into bed that night, Jamie looked up at him with those serious green eyes. Grandpa Joe, if bad guys ever came, you'd fight them, right? The question hit him like a physical blow. Why would you ask that? Tommy Morrison says his dad has guns to protect their family. Do we have guns? James chose his words carefully. I'll always protect you, Jamie. That's what grandfathers do. She seemed satisfied with that answer, drifting off to sleep, clutching her stuffed elephant. James sat in the chair beside her bed for a long time, watching her peaceful face in the moonlight streaming through her window. He'd left his war behind for this, for quiet evenings and bedtime stories, for science projects and multiplication tables. But as he finally headed to his own room, James couldn't shake the feeling that his war had just found him. In his bedroom closet, behind winter coats and shoe boxes, was a large metal case he hadn't opened in 3 years. His fingers traced the combination lock as muscle memory supplied the numbers. Inside, carefully maintained and wrapped in oiled cloth, were the tools of his former trade. A custom Remington 700, his K-bar knife, night vision equipment, and other instruments of precision warfare. James closed the case without taking anything out. Not yet. He was a grandfather now, not a killer. But Santiago Pierce didn't know that, and maybe that would be enough. Tomorrow was Friday. Jamie had a field trip to the Natural History Museum in Billings. For the first time since moving to Millbrook, James found himself wishing she wasn't going anywhere without him. Chapter 2. The Taking. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Montana. James stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the yellow school bus disappear around the corner with Jamie aboard. She'd been excited about the museum trip, chattering about dinosaurs and meteorites over breakfast. I'll bring you back something cool, Grandpa Joe, had been her parting words, accompanied by a fierce hug that smelled of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. Now, at 7:30 a.m., James was already at the school, beginning his custodial rounds. The building felt different without the children, hollow, echoing with phantom voices. He methodically worked through his checklist, but his attention kept drifting to the empty parking lot where the buses had departed. The call came at 2:47 p.m. James was replacing ceiling lights in the science lab when his phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something, instinct, paranoia, or the weight of Admiral Cox's warning, made him answer. James Summers. The voice that responded was cultured, speaking English with a faint accent of northern Mexico. Senor Summers. We meet again after all these years. Every muscle in James's body tensed. He knew that voice, had heard it in nightmares for 8 years. Santiago Pierce. You remember. I'm flattered, though I prefer my new title, Santiago Pierce Moreno. I've married into respectability, you see, but business is business. What do you want? Justice. Closure. Several things, really. But most immediately, I want you to sit down before I continue. James remained standing, gripping the phone tighter. Where is she? Ah, you already know. Excellent. Your granddaughter is quite beautiful, James. May I call you James? Such bright eyes, so much life in them. She reminds me of my own daughter at that age. The science lab began to tilt. James forced himself to breathe, to think tactically. If you hurt her, you'll what? Kill me. Pierce's laughter was genuinely amused. My friend, I've been trying to give you that opportunity for 8 years. But let's discuss terms like civilized men. Your little princess, Jamie, isn't it? Such a sweet name. She's safe. For now. But she's also mine. The buses never made it to Billings. A minor mechanical issue forced them to stop at a rest area, where my associates provided alternative transportation. Don't worry about the other children. They're unharmed and will be returned shortly with a story about getting lost. Only your granddaughter was selected for our private field trip. James's hand was trembling now. In 25 years of military service, through firefights and raids and operations that would never see declassification, he'd never felt fear like this. What do you want? $2 million to start. Consider a down payment on the debt you owe me. Pierce's voice hardened. You cripple me, Ghost. Did you know that? This shoulder never healed properly. I can barely lift my right arm above my head. Do you have any idea what that means for a man in my position? It means you should have stayed down. There's the soldier I remember. But you're just a janitor now, aren't you? Living quietly, raising a little girl, pretending the past is buried. How wonderfully domestic. James closed his eyes, drawing on decades of training to control his voice. I don't have $2 million. Then find it. You have connections, James. Former military men often do quite well in private security. I'm sure Admiral Cox could arrange something. The mention of Cox confirmed James's worst fears. Pierce had been watching, planning, gathering intelligence. This wasn't random. It was personal. I have 847 confirmed kills across 3 continents, James said quietly. You have 12 hours. Pierce's laughter was delighted. There he is, the ghost of Kandahar, the specter of Fallujah. I've missed this, my friend, but you misunderstand the situation. I'm not hiding in some cave or compound waiting for you to find me. I'm a respected businessman now. I have lawyers, politicians, even a few federal judges in my pocket. You can't simply murder your way to your granddaughter. Watch me. Oh, I intend to. 12 hours, you said? Interesting. My men are expecting you, of course. The compound is quite well defended. Motion sensors, night vision cameras, 30 armed guards with military training. Some of them are even former special forces themselves. It should be entertaining. The line went dead. James stood motionless in the empty science lab, phone still pressed to his ear. Around him, half-completed student projects about renewable energy seemed to mock him with their innocent optimism. On the whiteboard, someone had written, Quiz Monday, study chapters 8 to 9, in cheerful purple marker. His phone buzzed with a text message. A photo loaded slowly on the screen, Jamie, sitting in what looked like a comfortable room, playing with a tablet. She appeared unharmed, even relaxed. The timestamp showed it had been taken 20 minutes ago. Another text followed. Rest stop incident reported to authorities as breakdown plus confusion. Children returned safely to school. No one knows Jamie is missing yet. Let's keep it that way until our business is concluded. S. James deleted both messages and pocketed his phone. He had maybe 6 hours before Jamie's absence would be noticed, before search parties and FBI involvement complicated everything. Pierce was right about one thing. This wasn't Afghanistan or Iraq. He couldn't simply eliminate targets and extract under cover of chaos. But Pierce had made one crucial mistake. He'd threatened the only thing James had left to lose. Walking with forced calm to his custodial closet, James locked the door behind him and dialed Admiral Cox's number. Sir, I need everything you have on Santiago Pierce Moreno's current operations. Real estate holdings, business fronts, known associates. Ghost, what's happening? He has Jamie, sir. My granddaughter. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. When Cox spoke again, his voice carried the weight of command authority. How long? 12 hours. That's not enough time for official channels. Are you requesting operational support? James almost smiled. Cox was asking if he wanted backup, if he needed the kind of help that came with plausible deniability and off-the-books funding. Negative, sir. Just intelligence. This one's personal. Understood. Give me 30 minutes. James spent those 30 minutes methodically transforming. He drove home, showered, and changed into dark tactical clothing he'd hoped never to wear again. The metal case in his closet opened like a time machine, returning him to a version of himself he'd tried to leave buried. The Remington felt like an extension of his body as he checked the action and loaded it with match-grade .308 rounds. The K-bar found its familiar place on his belt. Night vision goggles, tactical radio, first aid kit, Each piece of equipment awakened muscle memories and operational protocols. When his phone rang again, James was ready. 3 possible locations, Cox reported. Pierce Moreno owns a ranch compound 40 miles north of Millbrook, a warehouse complex near the interstate, and a hunting lodge in the mountains. The ranch is most likely isolated, defensible, large enough for 30 guards. Send me everything. Ghost, she's counting on you bringing her home. Copy that, sir. As satellite images and floor plans loaded on his phone, James felt the familiar calm of pre-mission focus settling over him. Santiago Pierce had spent 8 years planning this revenge. But he'd forgotten one crucial detail about the man he was challenging. James Summers might be a janitor, but the ghost never truly retired. Chapter 3. The Hunt. The sun was setting behind the Montana mountains as James lay prone on a ridge overlooking Pierce's compound. Through his spotting scope, he studied the ranch with a methodical patience that had made him legendary among Navy SEALs. 2 hours of observation had revealed patterns, weaknesses, and confirmed his worst fears. The compound was a fortress. Pierce hadn't exaggerated about the security. James counted 32 guards visible on rotation, all carrying military-grade weapons and moving with the discipline of professional soldiers. Motion sensors dotted the perimeter, and thermal imaging cameras swept the approaches on automated schedules. This wasn't some cartel safe house. It was a military installation disguised as a cattle ranch. But James had infiltrated harder targets. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Admiral Cox. Thermal signature confirms 34 human targets inside main building. No positive ID on the child, but heat signature in northwest corner room matches size profile. James studied the building layout on his phone. The northwest room was on the 2nd floor, accessible only through the main structure. No external exits, reinforced walls, bulletproof windows. Pierce had chosen his prison well. Another text arrived. Unofficial assets, standing by if needed. Just say the word. James considered it. A full SEAL team could take this compound, but not without risking Jamie's life. Pierce would use her as a human shield the moment he detected an assault. This required surgical precision, not overwhelming force. He typed back, negative, radio silence until mission complete. At 9:47 p.m., James moved. He discarded the direct approach immediately. Instead, he circled 3 miles east to the river that fed the ranch's irrigation system. The water was mountain cold and moved fast, but it carried no electronics, no sensors, and no guards expecting a 62-year-old janitor to emerge from it like some aquatic specter. The pipeline access point was exactly where the satellite imagery had indicated. James slipped through the intake grate, his rebreather allowing him to move underwater through the main channel. 20 minutes later, he emerged inside the compound's pump house, weapon ready. The first guard died silently, James's K-bar finding the gap between vertebrae with surgical precision. The body disappeared into the pump machinery housing, where it wouldn't be found until morning. Moving through shadows that seemed to bend around him, James reached the main building's eastern wall. The security grid was professional but predictable. Cameras on fixed rotation schedules, motion detectors covering expected approach routes. He defeated similar systems in Mosul, Kandahar, and a dozen other places where detection meant death. But as he prepared to enter through a first-floor window, his phone vibrated. Another message, this one from Pierce himself. I know you're here, Ghost. Building is rigged with explosives. Any attempt to breach will result in your granddaughter's immediate termination. Come through the front door like a gentleman. James froze. Through his night vision, he could see the compound's guards suddenly shifting positions, adopting defensive stances. Floodlights blazed to life, turning night into harsh day. Pierce's voice boomed from hidden speakers. James Summers, you have 60 seconds to present yourself at the main entrance or the child dies. Checkmate. Pierce had anticipated everything, planned for every contingency. James holstered his sidearm and stepped into the light, hands visible but not raised. He wasn't surrendering. He was adapting. The front door opened to reveal Santiago Pierce himself, flanked by 4 guards. The man looked older than James remembered, his black hair now silver at the temples, but his dark eyes held the same cold intelligence that had made him so dangerous. His right arm hung at an awkward angle, confirming the permanent damage from their last encounter. The legendary ghost, reduced to a janitor's costume, Pierce observed, gesturing with his functioning left hand. Do you have any idea how long I've waited for this moment? Long enough to make mistakes, James replied evenly. Pierce smiled. Such as, you told me you had 30 guards. I count 32 visible, plus at least 6 more inside. That means you don't trust your own intelligence. Paranoia has served me well. No, James said, stepping closer despite the guards raising their weapons. Fear has. You're afraid of me, even now, even with all your advantages. Pierce's smile faltered slightly. Search him. The guards found James's knife, backup pistol, and tactical radio, but missed the ceramic blade sewn into his boot seam and the small explosive charge disguised as a belt buckle. They were good, but they weren't seals. Take him to see his granddaughter, Pierce ordered. Let them have their reunion before we conclude our business. The march through the compound revealed more details. Reinforced positions, overlapping fields of fire, enough firepower to hold off a small army. But also confirmation that Pierce's paranoia was his weakness. Guards were positioned to defend against external threats, not internal chaos. Jamie's prison was indeed the northwest room. She sat on a comfortable bed, wearing the same clothes from that morning, looking surprisingly calm for a kidnapped 9-year-old. When she saw James, her face lit up with relief rather than fear. Grandpa Joe, I knew you'd come. James knelt beside the bed, quickly checking her for injuries while pulling her into a fierce hug. Are you hurt, sweetheart? No, they've been nice. Weird but nice. The man with the broken arm said you knew each other from the old days. She lowered her voice to a whisper. Are you here to rescue me? That's the plan. Pierce's laughter echoed from the doorway. How touching. Yes, child, your grandfather and I are old acquaintances. We had a disagreement some years ago that left me permanently disabled. Jamie studied Pierce with the serious expression she wore when trying to understand adult complications. Did you hurt innocent people? Define innocent. That's a yes, she said matter-of-factly. Grandpa Joe says people who hurt innocent people are bad guys. From the mouths of babes, Pierce murmured, James, we need to discuss terms. The money was never really the point, of course. This is about balance. You took something from me, my mobility, my reputation, my standing among certain circles. I intend to take something from you. James stood slowly, positioning himself between Pierce and Jamie. Name your terms. Simple. You have a choice. I can kill you quickly, and your granddaughter grows up in my care, well-educated, properly trained in the family business. Or you can kill yourself, here and now, and she goes home to live with her aunt in California. That's not much of a choice. It's more than you gave my men in Juarez. James glanced around the room, cataloging exits, weapon positions, guard locations. The ceramic blade in his boot felt heavier with each passing second. And if I refuse both options, then you both die, slowly and painfully, while I broadcast it live to your former SEAL teammates. Let them see what happens to legends who think they can retire in peace. Jamie's small hand slipped into James's. It's okay, Grandpa Joe. You taught me about hard choices. Pierce looked genuinely curious. What did you teach her? James squeezed Jamie's hand gently. That sometimes good people have to do bad things to protect the people they love. Admirable philosophy. Have you reached a decision? Yes, James said quietly. I choose option 3. Which is? James smiled, and for the first time in 8 years, Santiago Pierce saw the expression that had terrified terrorists across 3 continents. I kill all of you. The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, James heard the distant rumble of explosions from somewhere in the compound. Not his work. He hadn't planted any charges yet. But apparently, Admiral Cox had decided radio silence was optional when it came to 9-year-old hostages. Stay down, Jamie, James shouted, drawing the ceramic blade as chaos erupted around them. The real war was just beginning. Chapter 4. Ghosts and Shadows. The compound erupted into chaos as secondary explosions rocked the building. In the absolute darkness of the mountain night, James moved like the predator he'd once been, muscle memory and training overriding 8 years of civilian life. Pierce's voice cut through the confusion. Emergency lighting. Where's my goddamn emergency lighting? The ceramic blade found the throat of the nearest guard before the man could raise his rifle. James caught the falling body, appropriating the guard's weapon and night vision goggles in one fluid motion. Through the green-tinted display, he could see Jamie pressed against the far wall, exactly where he'd told her to stay. Red emergency lights flickered to life, bathing everything in a hellish glow. Pierce was shouting orders in rapid Spanish, his remaining guards trying to establish defensive positions while dealing with whatever was attacking the compound's perimeter. 60 seconds, James whispered to Jamie as he moved past her toward the door. When I come back, we're leaving. Be careful, Grandpa Joe. Through the corridor window, James could see muzzle flashes erupting from the tree line. Admiral Cox's unofficial assets were making their presence known, drawing Pierce's forces away from the main building. But the assault was surgical, precise, designed to create distraction rather than total destruction. Pierce appeared in the hallway, his left hand gripping a satellite phone while his damaged right arm hung uselessly. Status report. How many attackers? Unknown, sir. One of his lieutenants reported. Sniper fire from multiple positions. We've lost 6 men. And the prisoner? James stepped from the shadows behind Pierce, the muzzle of the appropriated rifle pressed against the cartel leader's spine. The prisoner is leaving. Pierce went very still. Impressive, but futile. You'll never make it out of this building alive. Probably not, but I'll make sure you don't either. You're forgetting something, Ghost. I have resources you can't imagine. Political connections, federal judges, senators who owe me favors. Even if you escape tonight, I'll find you again. And next time, I won't be so merciful. James considered this, then nodded thoughtfully. You're right. I can't keep running. Can't keep looking over my shoulder for the rest of Jamie's childhood. He pressed the rifle barrel harder against Pierce's back. So this ends tonight. You can't murder me in cold blood. Not anymore. You're a grandfather now, remember? A janitor. You've gone soft. Santiago, James said quietly, who never understood the difference between killers and soldiers. Killers enjoy it. Soldiers do what's necessary. The explosion of automatic weapons fire from downstairs interrupted their philosophical discussion. Pierce's men were engaging the external threat, leaving fewer guards in the building itself. James had perhaps 3 minutes before the distraction ended and the full weight of Pierce's security focused on him. Move, he ordered, prodding Pierce toward Jamie's room. But as they approached the doorway, James's tactical instincts screamed a warning. The angles were wrong, the shadows off. He threw himself sideways just as 2 guards opened fire from concealed positions. The world dissolved into muzzle flashes and concrete dust. James rolled behind a marble pillar, returning fire with controlled bursts that sent the guards scrambling for cover. But Pierce was moving, shouting into his satellite phone in rapid Spanish. Ora, metenlos a todos. The building's fire suppression system activated, flooding the corridors with dense chemical fog. In the confusion, James heard Pierce's footsteps retreating toward the main staircase. He had seconds to choose. Pursue Pierce or secure Jamie. No choice at all. James burst into Jamie's room to find her exactly where he'd left her, but she wasn't alone. A massive guard stood over her, assault rifle trained on the small figure huddled on the bed. Julio Sexton. The man introduced himself with professional courtesy. Former Delta Force. I've heard stories about you, Ghost. Then you know how this ends. Maybe, but the girl dies first. James studied the tactical situation. Sexton was a professional, maintaining proper distance and angle to prevent a quick disarm. The man's positioning was textbook perfect until Jamie spoke up. Are you going to hurt my Grandpa Joe? Sexton glanced down at her, just for a microsecond. Kid, this is grown-up business. The ceramic blade took him in the throat before he could finish the sentence. James had thrown it on her hand, a technique he'd perfected during 18 months of counterterrorism operations in Yemen. Sexton toppled backward, his rifle clattering across the floor. "Time to go," James said, scooping Jamie into his arms. She wrapped her legs around his waist and her arms around his neck, the position they practiced during their hiking trips when she got tired. "Like Princess Leia getting rescued," she whispered. Exactly like that. The corridor was chaos. Chemical fog, emergency lighting, and the distant sound of gunfire from outside created a nightmare landscape. But James moved through it with the confidence of a man who'd navigated worse terrain under heavier fire. The main staircase was blocked by Pierce's remaining guards, so James headed for the service elevator he'd noted during his initial reconnaissance. It was the kind of tactical detail that separated special operations soldiers from regular infantry. Always have a backup exit strategy. But as they reached the elevator, Pierce's voice echoed from hidden speakers throughout the building. "James Summers, you have 1 minute to surrender yourself at the main entrance, or I detonate the charges placed throughout this building. Your granddaughter's death will be slow and painful." Jamie tightened her grip around James's neck. "He's bluffing, right?" James looked down at her serious green eyes. 8 years of peaceful civilian life hadn't prepared him for this moment, having to explain to a 9-year-old that some people really were monsters. "No, sweetheart, he's not bluffing." "Then what do we do?" The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Inside, James could see Pierce waiting with 2 guards and what looked like a radio detonator in his functioning left hand. "We do what soldiers do," James said quietly. "We adapt." He set Jamie down gently and knelt to her eye level. "Remember our hiking rules? Stay behind me. Move when I move. Stop when I stop." She nodded. "This is just a really important hike, okay?" James stood and walked into the elevator, hands visible but not raised. Pierce smiled triumphantly as the doors closed behind them. "Excellent choice. You always were pragmatic. Just promise me the girl walks away from this." "Of course. She'll be my insurance policy for years to come. A guarantee that any of your former teammates think twice before bothering me again." The elevator descended in silence. James counted floors, calculated timing, and prepared for what came next. Pierce thought he'd won, thought he'd broken the legendary ghost by threatening a child. He was about to learn the difference between threatening James Summers the janitor and threatening James Summers the grandfather. The elevator reached the ground floor with another soft chime. The doors opened to reveal the compound's main entrance hall, where at least a dozen guards waited with weapons trained on them. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Pierce gestured with his left hand at his assembled forces. 8 years of planning, James. 8 years of building resources, recruiting talent, preparing for this moment. "Impressive," James agreed. "One question, though." "Yes. Did you plan for Admiral Cox?" Pierce's triumphant expression faltered. "What do you mean?" James smiled. "I mean, you kidnapped the granddaughter of a man who still has friends in very high places. Did you really think this was going to be a private party?" The sound of helicopters approaching from the north grew steadily louder. Military helicopters, flying low and fast, with a distinctive rotor signature of Navy MH-60 Seahawks. Pierce raised the detonator. "I'll bring this entire building down before I let them take me." "No," James said quietly, "you won't." The ceramic blade he'd palmed from Sexton's body took Pierce in the wrist, severing tendons and sending the detonator clattering across the marble floor. In the same motion, James grabbed Jamie and rolled behind the reception desk as the guards opened fire. But the real attack came from above. Navy SEALs fast-roped through the skylights in a precision insertion that would have made James proud in his operational days. The firefight lasted exactly 97 seconds. When the smoke cleared, Santiago Pierce lay bleeding on his own marble floor, surrounded by the bodies of his elite guards. His right arm was already useless. Now his left hand was mangled beyond repair. Admiral Cox's voice crackled over the tactical radio of the nearest SEAL. "Ghost, you have confirmation on the package?" James looked down at Jamie, who was peeking over the reception desk with wide but unafraid eyes. "Package is secure, sir." "Outstanding. Cleanup crew inbound. You two get out of there." As they walked toward the exit, stepping carefully around the debris of Pierce's 8-year revenge plan, Jamie looked up at her grandfather with newfound understanding. Grandpa Joe. Yes, sweetheart. You're not really just a janitor, are you? James considered this carefully. I'm now. But sometimes when people threaten my family, I remember how to be other things too. Cool, she said, as if grandfather's regularly conducting military operations was perfectly normal. Can we stop for ice cream on the way home? Absolutely. Behind them, Santiago Pierce screamed curses in 2 languages as medics worked to save his life. He'd survived to face federal charges, James knew. The kind that came with life sentences and no possibility of parole. But that was someone else's problem now. James Summers had a granddaughter to get home, and tomorrow was Saturday. They had science projects to finish and a normal life to resume. The ghost had done his job. Now the grandfather could take over again. Chapter 5, Unfinished Business. 3 days later, James was back to mopping floors at Riverside Elementary, his janitorial uniform pristine and his movements carrying the same measured precision they always had. To the outside world, nothing had changed. The official story, crafted by people with security clearances higher than most state governors, was simple. Jamie Summers had been found safe after getting separated from her field trip group due to a bus breakdown. But James knew better than to believe in clean endings. Tuesday afternoon, as he emptied trash cans in the administrative offices, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your friend Santiago sends his regards from his hospital bed. He asked me to tell you that family is forever. James deleted the message and continued his work, but his mind was already shifting into tactical mode. Santiago Pierce was in federal custody, but criminal organizations didn't die with their leaders. They evolved, adapted, found new management. That evening, as Jamie worked on her homework at the kitchen table, James made a phone call. Admiral Cox, speaking. Sir, it's Ghost. I need a status update on Pierce. He's in federal medical detention, maximum security. Lost the use of both arms. Looking at 17 federal charges including kidnapping, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. What? Someone using the initial he just made contact. Claimed to be speaking for Pierce. The silence stretched for several seconds. I'll make some calls. In the meantime, stay alert. Pierce had a lieutenant named Earl Russell who disappeared during the raid. Former Marine, dishonorably discharged for excessive violence. We assumed he'd fled the country. James felt that familiar chill. Apparently not. Ghost. Maybe it's time to consider relocation. Full witness protection, new identities. No. James watched Jamie carefully coloring a map of South America for her geography project. She deserves a normal childhood, not a life spent running from shadows. Then we end this permanently. Copy that, sir. After dinner, James tucked Jamie into bed with their usual routine of stories and whispered conversations about her day. But tonight, she seemed more thoughtful than usual. Grandpa Joe, when you were a soldier, did you ever get scared? Every day, sweetheart. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is, being scared but doing what's right anyway. She considered this seriously. Are you scared now? James smoothed her hair back from her forehead, the same gesture he'd made with her mother 25 years ago. A little, but I'm not worried. Why not? Because I have something worth protecting. That makes everything simpler. Jamie smiled and drifted towards sleep. James sat in the chair beside her bed, listening to the sounds of their quiet house settling into night. But his ears were also cataloging every sound from outside. The neighbor's dog, wind through the trees, the distant hum of highway traffic. At 2:17 a.m., the sounds changed. James was instantly awake, moving silently to the window. A van was parked across the street, engine running, lights off. Two figures in dark clothing were advancing on the house from different angles, moving with military precision. Earl Russell was making his play. James slipped into Jamie's room and gently shook her awake. Kiddo, we need to play the quiet game. Remember our fire drill practice? Jamie nodded, immediately alert. They'd rehearsed this scenario dozens of times, though she'd thought it was just a safety exercise. She slipped out of bed and followed James to the hidden panel in her closet floor, a tunnel he'd excavated during their first year in the house, leading to the storm drain system beneath the street. Wait in the tunnel, he whispered. If you hear gunshots, follow the drain to the school and call 911. What about you? I'll be right behind you. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Jamie hugged him fiercely before disappearing into the tunnel. James sealed the panel and moved to his bedroom, with a metal case weighted like an old friend. The Remington felt perfect in his hands as he took position at the second-floor window. Through the scope, he could see Earl Russell directing his team with hand signals. 3 men total, all armed with military weapons and night vision equipment. Professional, but not perfect. James's first shot took Russell in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him sprawling behind the neighbor's fence. The second shot shattered the van's engine block, eliminating their escape route. The third shot took out the streetlight, plunging the neighborhood into darkness that favored his position. The return fire was immediate and intense. Bullets shattered his bedroom window, chewed through drywall, and sent picture frames exploding into fragments. But James had already moved, relocating to the bathroom, where a different window offered a better angle. His phone rang. Earl Russell's voice was tight with pain, but controlled. "Ghost, you're good. But you can't fight all of us. Watch me. I have information you need. About Pierce's insurance policy." James paused, finger on the trigger as he tracked one of Russell's men through his scope. "Speak." He planted evidence in safe deposit boxes across 3 states. Photos, documents, recordings, enough to destroy Admiral Cox's career and implicate half the Pentagon in war crimes. If anything happens to Pierce or his organization, it all goes public. Bullshit. Box 347 at First National Bank of Billings. The key is taped under the sink in your kitchen. Pierce had people in your house last month, planting more than just surveillance devices. James's blood went cold. He'd swept the house for electronics after Pierce's capture, but he hadn't thought to check for physical dead drops. "What do you want?" "Safe passage out of the country. In exchange, I give you the locations of all the evidence caches and the name of Pierce's contact in the Justice Department." A muzzle flash from the backyard revealed the position of Russell's second man. James put a bullet through the fence post 6 inches from the target's head. "Counteroffer. You leave now and I don't kill you. You're not thinking clearly, Ghost. This is bigger than just revenge." Pierce spent 8 years building a network of blackmail and corruption. Your granddaughter will never be safe until we dismantle all of it. James considered this, tracking the third operative who was attempting to flank the house from the north. The man moved well, but not well enough to fool someone who'd spent decades hunting human prey. 30 seconds to disappear, James announced, "or I start collecting scalps." "You're making a mistake." The shot took Russell's third man in the leg, dropping him in the open driveway. James could have made it a kill shot, but he wanted Russell to understand that mercy was a choice, not a limitation. 20 seconds. Sound of engines starting from several blocks away. Backup vehicles positioned for exactly this scenario. Russell wasn't just a musclehead Marine, he was thinking tactically. But James had been thinking tactically for 25 years. The Molotov cocktail he threw from the bathroom window landed directly on Russell's position behind the fence. Homemade napalm, a recipe he'd learned from explosive ordnance disposal specialists in Iraq, turned the wooden fence into an inferno that would be visible for miles. In the chaos of flames and smoke, James slipped out the back door and circled through the neighbor's yard. Russell was pulling his wounded man toward a motorcycle hidden behind the burning fence, his shoulder bleeding, but his movements still coordinated. James could have taken him easily. Clean shot, no witnesses, problem solved. Instead, he let them escape. Not from mercy, but from calculation. A dead Earl Russell was just another body. A living Earl Russell was bait, leading James to the rest of Pierce's network. 20 minutes later, firefighters were hosing down the neighbor's fence while police interviewed James about the gang violence that had erupted in their quiet neighborhood. The official story would blame drug dealers fighting over territory, just another random crime in an increasingly dangerous world. Jamie emerged from the storm drain as planned, dirty but unharmed. To anyone watching, she was just a scared little girl whose grandfather had heroically protected her from random criminals. But as they sat in the back of an ambulance while paramedics checked them for injuries, Jamie whispered the question James had been dreading. This isn't over, is it? James looked down at her serious green eyes, seeing too much understanding for a 9-year-old. No, sweetheart. It's not. Then what do we do? We finish it. Jamie nodded, as if this was perfectly reasonable. Do you need my help? Just keep being brave. That's all I need from you. As the emergency vehicles departed and their neighborhood returned to its illusion of safety, James made a mental list of everything that needed to happen next. Pierce's network had to be dismantled completely, every cache of blackmail material destroyed, every corrupt official exposed. It would mean leaving the quiet life behind, at least temporarily. It would mean becoming the ghost again, hunting in shadows, and leaving no survivors to threaten his granddaughter's future. But that was a price James was willing to pay. Some wars never really ended. They just paused between battles. This battle was over. The war was just beginning. Chapter 6. The Network. The safe deposit box at First National Bank of Billings contained exactly what Earl Russell had promised. Photographs, financial documents, audio recordings, and a detailed organizational chart that made James's blood run cold. Santiago Pierce hadn't just been running a criminal enterprise. He'd been operating a systematic corruption network that reached into the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Federal Judge William Cox, Admiral Cox's younger brother, appeared in 3 different photographs accepting briefcases full of cash. Deputy Attorney General Dan Tanner was recorded discussing the dismissal of cartel-related charges in exchange for campaign contributions. Most damning of all was a video showing Senator Albert Parker authorizing the sale of military weapons to Pierce's organization through false end-user certificates. Pierce had been playing a much deeper game than anyone realized. James photographed everything with his phone, then drove to a secure location Admiral Cox had provided, an abandoned mining facility 40 miles outside Millbrook, where they could talk without electronic surveillance. Jesus Christ, Cox muttered, scrolling through the images on James's phone. Billy's been on Pierce's payroll for 3 years. My own brother. It gets worse, James said, showing him the organizational chart. Pierce has compromised officials in 12 states. This isn't just about revenge anymore. It's about national security. Cox studied the documents with the grim expression of a career military officer watching his country being sold to the highest bidder. How deep does this go? Deep enough that taking down Pierce was just the beginning. His network is designed to survive without him. Earl Russell isn't just seeking revenge. He's protecting a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise. What do you need? Operational authority, full black budget support, and complete deniability for what comes next. Cox met James's eyes. You're talking about extrajudicial assassination of American citizens. I'm talking about removing compromised officials who betrayed their oaths and endangered national security. The legal system can't touch them. They've corrupted it from the inside. And your granddaughter? James had been dreading that question. She's the reason this has to be done right. I won't spend the rest of her childhood looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next Earl Russell is going to show up at our door. Cox nodded slowly. What's your operational timeline? 72 hours to dismantle the entire network. After that, the evidence goes public, and we let whatever's left of the Justice Department sort through the wreckage. That afternoon, James made the hardest phone call of his civilian life. Summers' residence, Jamie speaking. Despite everything, her cheerful voice made him smile. Hey kiddo, it's Grandpa Joe. Are you coming home for dinner? Mrs. Patterson said you had to go out of town for work. James closed his eyes. The cover story was necessary, but lying to Jamie felt like a betrayal. I'm going to be gone for a few days, sweetheart. But Aunt Lisa is coming to stay with you. The one from California? Cool. Will you bring me something back? Absolutely. Listen, I need you to be extra careful while I'm gone. Stay close to Aunt Lisa, don't go anywhere alone, and call me if anything feels wrong. Is this about the bad guys from before? Too smart for her own good. Yes, but this time, I'm going to make sure they can't bother us anymore. Promise. Promise. After arranging secure protection for Jamie through Admiral Cox's resources, James began his methodical dismantling of Pierce's network. The first target was Deputy Attorney General Dan Tanner, who maintained a private office in a Washington, D.C. building that also housed 3 legitimate law firms. James waited in the parking garage at 11:47 p.m. when Tanner arrived for what he believed was a meeting with Earl Russell about damage control. Instead, he found a ghost from his classified nightmares. Tanner, the deputy attorney general, spun around, his hand automatically reaching for a sidearm he didn't carry. "Who are you?" "Someone who's seen your file." James stepped from behind a concrete pillar, close enough to be threatening, but far enough to avoid any desperate moves. $17 million in offshore accounts. 43 criminal cases dismissed or plea bargained down to nothing. 8 federal judges appointed based on your recommendations. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." James held up his phone, playing one of the audio recordings from Pierce's safe deposit box. Tanner's voice was clearly audible, discussing the sale of federal seizure assets back to their original criminal owners. Tanner's face went pale. "What do you want?" "Your resignation, effective immediately. A full confession detailing everyone you've compromised. And the current location of Earl Russell." "I can't." "You can, and you will. Because the alternative is that this recording, along with financial documentation of every bribe you've taken, gets released to the Washington Post tomorrow morning." Tanner looked around the parking garage as if seeking escape routes. "Pierce said you were just some washed-up special forces has-been." Pierce was wrong about a lot of things. 30 minutes later, James had a signed confession, a resignation letter, and the address of a safe house in Virginia where Earl Russell was coordinating what remained of Pierce's organization. But as he drove away from Washington, D.C., James's phone rang with a number he recognized, Admiral Cox, calling on emergency line. "Ghost, we have a problem. Someone just tried to kill my brother Billy. Professional hit, 3 shooters barely survived." James felt ice in his veins. Russell's moving faster than expected. "There's more. Senator Parker was found dead in his office 2 hours ago. Apparent suicide, but it doesn't feel right. He's cleaning house," James realized. Russell isn't trying to preserve Pierce's network. He's destroying it to cover his tracks. Which means he's coming for Jamie next. James was already turning around, abandoning his planned assault on the Virginia safe house. If Russell was eliminating everyone connected to Pierce's operations, Jamie represented the ultimate leverage, the granddaughter of the man who'd brought down the entire network. "How long to get back to Millbrook?" Cox asked. 4 hours if I push it. I'll redirect the protection detail to..." The line went dead. James tried calling back, but got only static. Then his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Your friend, the Admiral, won't be taking any more calls. Neither will your granddaughter if you don't follow instructions exactly." A photograph loaded slowly on the screen. Admiral Cox tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse, blood running from a head wound but clearly alive. The timestamp showed the photo had been taken 12 minutes ago. Another text. "Virginia Safe House, Warehouse District, 1247, Industrial Boulevard. Come alone, no weapons, or they both die." James stared at the message, every tactical instinct screaming that this was suicide. Russell had outmaneuvered him, turned the hunter into the hunted, and was now dictating terms from a position of strength. But as he drove through the Virginia night toward what was almost certainly an ambush, James found himself oddly calm. This was familiar territory, the impossible mission, the overwhelming odds, the choice between certain death and probable death. He'd been here before, in Fallujah and Kandahar and a dozen other places where good men died for causes larger than themselves. The difference was, this time it was personal. Russell wanted to face the legendary ghost? Fine. It was time to remind the world why legends were born in the first place. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The warehouse district in Virginia was a maze of industrial buildings and storage facilities, perfect for the kind of off-the-books operation Earl Russell was running. James parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, every sense heightened to combat levels he hadn't experienced since Iraq. 1247, Industrial Boulevard was a mid-sized warehouse with multiple loading docks and minimal external lighting. Through his binoculars, James could see armed sentries at 2 positions, both trying to look casual while maintaining overlapping fields of fire on the main entrance. Professional, but predictable. James had spent 8 years as a civilian, but muscle memory never truly faded. He circled the building methodically, cataloging entry points, escape routes, and defensive positions. The warehouse had been chosen well, isolated, multiple exits, good sight lines for defenders, but also had skylights. 20 minutes later, James was moving across the warehouse roof like a shadow, the ceramic blade from Pierce's compound his only weapon. He'd considered bringing guns, but Russell was expecting the Ghost, the legendary sniper who'd terrorized terrorists across 3 continents. Sometimes the best strategy was being someone completely different. The first skylight gave him a view of the warehouse floor. Admiral Cox was tied to a chair in the center of the space, clearly alive but bloodied. 2 guards flanked him, while a third man, Earl Russell himself, paced nearby with a satellite phone pressed to his ear. "No, I don't care about the senator. He was weak, compromised. We're cleaning house completely." Russell's voice carried clearly in the warehouse acoustics. Pierce's networked eyes with him. No loose ends, no evidence, no witnesses. James counted 12 armed men total, positioned throughout the warehouse in a defensive perimeter. Good spacing, professional equipment, coordinated communications. Russell had recruited quality personnel for his final operation. But they were all looking down, not up. The skylight opened silently. James had discovered years ago that most building security focused on doors and windows, not access points 20 feet off the ground. He rappelled down on climbing rope, landing in the shadows behind a stack of shipping containers. "Where's the girl?" Russell was saying into his phone. "I specifically ordered." "What do you mean she's not there?" James smiled grimly as he moved through the shadows. Admiral Cox's protection detail was better than Russell had anticipated. Jamie was safe, which meant James could focus entirely on the mission at hand. The first guard died quietly, James's blade finding the gap between helmet and body armor with surgical precision. The body fell behind a forklift, out of sight from the other positions. The second guard was more challenging, positioned in the open with clear sight lines in multiple directions. But James had learned patience in sniper school, and patience was a weapon all its own. He waited 17 minutes for the guard to check his phone, then moved like lightning across 20 feet of open space. 2 down, 10 to go. "Ghost!" Russell's voice echoed through the warehouse. "I know you're here. My perimeter sensors detected your entry 15 minutes ago." James froze, reassessing. If Russell had motion detectors, thermal imaging, or other electronic surveillance, the tactical situation was more complex than he'd assumed. "Your granddaughter is safe, by the way," Russell continued. "My team couldn't penetrate the Admiral's protection detail. Impressive work. Navy SEALs providing personal security for a 9-year-old girl. You must have friends in very high places." Admiral Cox's voice, weak but clear. "Don't listen to him, Ghost. It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Russell laughed. "But what choice does he have? Family is everything to men like us. It makes us predictable." James studied the warehouse layout, calculating angles and distances. Russell was using Admiral Cox as bait, but he was also revealing his position with every word. The satellite phone required line-of-sight communication with orbiting satellites, which meant Russell was standing in a specific area with roof access. "Tell me something, Ghost," Russell called out. "Was it worth it? Destroying Pierce's network, bringing down all those corrupt officials, protecting your precious granddaughter, was it worth Admiral Cox's life?" "That depends," James replied from the shadows, his voice echoing off warehouse walls in a way that made location impossible to determine. "Are you planning to kill him regardless of what I do?" "Smart question. The answer is yes, of course. The Admiral knows too much, just like you. The only question is whether he dies quickly or slowly." James was moving again, using the shipping containers and industrial equipment as cover while he closed the distance to Russell's position. But the man was right about one thing. Family made people predictable. That's why James had stopped thinking like a grandfather and started thinking like a soldier. The explosive charge detonated exactly where James had calculated it would, at the base of the warehouse's main support pillar. He'd planted it during his initial reconnaissance, using plastique from the emergency kit he always carried in his vehicle. The building didn't collapse, but it shifted dramatically, sending Russell's men scrambling for cover as steel girders groaned and concrete dust filled the air. In the chaos, James reached Admiral Cox and cut his bonds with a ceramic blade. "Can you move, sir?" "Well enough." Cox stood unsteadily, accepting the backup pistol James offered. "What's the plan?" "You get to the extraction point. I finish this." "Ghost." "That's an order, Admiral." Cox nodded and limped toward the warehouse's north exit, where James had spotted an emergency door during his reconnaissance. It would take him to a predetermined rally point where backup would be waiting. Russell's voice cut through the settling dust. "Impressive, but ultimately futile. I have 20 more men surrounding this building, thermal imaging helicopters inbound, and enough firepower to level city blocks." James didn't doubt it. Russell had clearly planned for every contingency, built multiple layers of backup into his operation. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed James was trying to escape. "Earl Russell," James called out, stepping into the open near the center of the warehouse. Former Marine, dishonorably discharged for excessive violence in Helmand Province. 3 confirmed kills on American prisoners, covered up by Pierce's network. "You've done your homework." "I always do." James stood perfectly still, arms at his sides, looking directly at Russell's position behind a stack of steel drums. "Question is, have you done yours?" Russell emerged from cover, assault rifle trained on James's chest. He was younger than James had expected, maybe 40, with the lean build and predatory eyes of a career killer. "I know all about you, Ghost. The legendary sniper, the impossible shots, the confirmed kills. But you're 20 years older now, out of practice, going soft." "Probably true," James agreed. "But you're forgetting something, which is, I'm not here to escape. I'm here to make sure you never threaten my family again." Russell's finger tightened on the trigger. "Any last words?" "Yeah," James said calmly. Boom. The second explosive charge, the one James had planted on the building's natural gas line during his approach, detonated with enough force to turn the warehouse into a crematorium. James had calculated the blast radius precisely, positioning himself in the one spot that would be sheltered by the steel girders while ensuring Russell's position would be completely consumed. The explosion threw James 20 feet through the air, slamming him into a concrete wall with enough force to crack ribs and black out his vision. But when consciousness returned 30 seconds later, he was alive. Earl Russell was not. James dragged himself to his feet, surveying the destruction. The warehouse was a burning ruin. Russell's network of corrupt officials was exposed and dismantled, and Pierce himself would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. It was finished. But as James limped toward the exit, his phone buzzed with a text message from Admiral Cox. "Jamie's asking when you're coming home." "What should I tell her?" James looked back at the burning warehouse, then typed his reply. "Tell her Grandpa Joe will be there for bedtime stories." Some wars ended with treaties and ceremonies. Others ended with fire and ashes in an abandoned warehouse. Both kinds had their place in the world. Time to go home. Chapter 8, Revelations. 3 weeks later, James was back to his routine at Riverside Elementary, pushing his custodial cart through familiar hallways while children's voices echoed from classrooms. To any observer, nothing had changed. The gray-haired janitor moved with the same measured precision, performed his duties with the same quiet efficiency. But everything was different. The official story, crafted by people whose names appeared on no organizational charts, was elegant in its simplicity. A gas explosion at an abandoned warehouse had claimed the lives of several wanted criminals, including Earl Russell, who had been sought in connection with multiple federal crimes. The investigation was closed, the case files sealed, and the world moved on to newer headlines. Pierce's network had been quietly dismantled. Deputy Attorney General Dan Tanner had resigned, citing health concerns. Federal Judge William Cox had recused himself from all cases pending an ethics review that would never quite conclude. Senator Albert Parker's suicide had been explained by financial irregularities that painted him as a lone wolf rather than part of a larger conspiracy. The truth was buried under layers of classification and compartmentalization. Only 3 people knew the complete story: James, Admiral Cox, and whoever held the highest security clearance in the intelligence community. Jamie knew none of this, and that was exactly how James wanted it. "Grandpa Joe," her voice interrupted his thoughts as she appeared in the hallway, escaping from art class with paint-stained fingers and a huge smile. "Look what I made." She held up a drawing of their house, complete with flower garden and a stick figure that was unmistakably James holding a mop. In the corner, she'd written "My Hero" in careful 9-year-old handwriting. "It's perfect," James said, and meant it. "Mrs. Rodriguez says we're supposed to write a story about our heroes for homework. Can I interview you?" James knelt down to her level, studying the innocent green eyes that saw him only as a grandfather who read bedtime stories and helped with science projects. "What kind of questions? Like, what makes someone a hero? Have you ever been scared? What's the bravest thing you've ever done?" The bravest thing? James considered the question seriously. Jumping out of helicopters under enemy fire? Leading rescue missions in hostile territory? Facing down armed terrorists with nothing but a sniper rifle and iron determination? "The bravest thing I've ever done," he said quietly, "was deciding to be your grandfather instead of a soldier." Jamie's brow furrowed with the concentration she applied to complex math problems. "That doesn't sound very brave. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones nobody sees. Sometimes courage means choosing love over fear, family over duty, peace over war." "Did you have to give up a lot to be my grandfather?" James thought about that for a moment. The career, the adrenaline, the brotherhood of special operations, the sense of purpose that came from serving something larger than himself. "I didn't give up anything, kiddo. I found something better." That evening, as they sat at their kitchen table working on Jamie's hero interview, James found himself answering questions he'd never been asked before. "Were you ever a hero to other people?" "I serve with heroes. Real heroes. People who risked everything to protect others. Like police officers. Like soldiers, yes. And teachers and doctors. And sometimes just ordinary people who do extraordinary things when they have to." Jamie chewed her pencil thoughtfully. "Are there still bad guys out there?" The question hit harder than James expected. He could lie, paint the world in simple colors where good guys always won and bad guys always lost. But Jamie deserved better than comfortable illusions. "Yes," he said, "there are still bad guys, but there are also still heroes fighting them. And most of the time, the good guys win." "How do you know?" "Because you're here, safe and happy, doing homework in a warm house. Because your friends are all sleeping peacefully in their beds. Because most people in the world are good, and good people don't give up." Jamie nodded seriously, then wrote something in her notebook. "One more question. If you had to be a soldier again, would you?" James looked at his granddaughter. Paint on her fingernails, gap-toothed smile, hair that never stayed properly brushed no matter how hard they tried. He thought about Earl Russell burning in a warehouse, about Santiago Pierce rotting in federal prison, about corrupt officials whose careers had ended in disgrace and ruin. "Only if I had to protect my family," he said, "and only if there was no other choice." "Good," Jamie said, closing her notebook with satisfaction. "Because I like having a grandfather better than having a hero. What if I told you they could be the same thing?" She considered this with the gravity of someone solving a complex equation. "Then I guess I'd be pretty lucky." Later that night, after Jamie was asleep, James sat on his front porch looking at the stars above Montana's endless sky. His phone buzzed with a secure message from Admiral Cox. "Congressional Oversight Committee wants to debrief you on the Pierce operation. Classified session. No records, just loose ends to tie up." James typed back, "Tell them the ghost is retired." James Summers is available for questioning, but he's just a janitor who got lucky. "You sure about that?" James looked through the window at Jamie's bedroom, where a night light cast gentle shadows on drawings of volcanoes and mathematical equations. "Positive, sir. My war is over." But as he prepared to go inside, James noticed a car parked at the end of the street that hadn't been there earlier. Dark sedan, tinted windows, engine running. It could be nothing. Someone making a phone call, waiting for a friend, lost, and checking directions. Or it could be something else. James studied the vehicle through the peripheral vision techniques he'd perfected in hostile territory. Two figures in the front seat, both watching his house. Professional posture, alert but not aggressive. Government agents, most likely, or private security. The car pulled away after 10 minutes, disappearing into the suburban night without incident. But its presence was a reminder that some shadows were permanent, that the world James had left behind occasionally sent echoes into the peaceful life he'd built. That was fine. He'd made his choice, and he'd live with the consequences. Inside, James checked the locks, set the security system, and performed a final sweep of the house, habits that would never entirely fade. But instead of feeling like surveillance, it felt like protection. Not the paranoid vigilance of a soldier, but the careful attention of a grandfather who'd learned the difference between necessary precautions and living in fear. Tomorrow was Friday. Jamie had a math test, followed by soccer practice, followed by their weekly tradition of pizza and a movie. Normal life, ordinary challenges, the kind of problems that could be solved with homework help and bedtime stories. The ghost was dead and buried in a warehouse in Virginia. James Summers was alive and well in Montana, and that's exactly where he intended to stay. But if anyone ever threatened his granddaughter again, they'd discover that some ghosts were harder to kill than others. For now, though, it was enough to be a grandfather who read bedtime stories and helped with science projects. Heroes came in many forms, and the best ones wore custodial uniforms and knew how to make perfect hot chocolate on cold winter nights. Chapter 9. Home. 6 months later, spring had returned to Montana with the promise of new beginnings. James stood in the school's main hallway, replacing burnt-out fluorescent bulbs while keeping one eye on the playground visible through tall windows. Jamie was at recess, playing soccer with friends whose names he knew by heart. Sarah, Michael, Emma, and David, children whose parents trusted him to keep their school safe and clean. Life had settled into rhythms that felt permanent. Morning coffee while Jamie ate cereal and chattered about her dreams. Custodial work that gave him purpose without the weight of life and death decisions. Evening homework sessions where the biggest crisis was long division or a forgotten geography assignment. Weekend hikes in the mountains where Jamie collected rocks and asked endless questions about everything from geology to why the sky was blue. It was James had discovered exactly the life he'd never known he wanted. Mr. Summers? Mrs. Patterson's voice interrupted his thoughts. The principal approached with her usual warm smile, but James caught the slight hesitation in her manner that suggested official business. Yes, ma'am. There are some gentlemen here to see you. They're waiting in my office. James set down his tools and followed Mrs. Patterson down the hallway, his mind automatically cataloging details. Two men in conservative suits, government-bearing, the kind of polite professionalism that came with federal credentials. They stood when he entered, extending hands for firm handshakes and introducing themselves with names that were probably not the ones on their birth certificates. Agent Smith, Agent Jones, Department of Homeland Security, the older one said. We'd like to speak with you privately, if possible. Mrs. Patterson left them alone, closing the door behind her. James remained standing, hands at his sides, reading body language and micro-expressions with skills that 25 years of special operations had burned into his nervous system. How can I help you, gentlemen? Agent Smith consulted a tablet computer. We're conducting follow-up interviews related to the Santiago Pierce investigation. Just tying up loose ends, ensuring all potential threats have been neutralized. I thought that case was closed. Officially, yes. But Pierce had extensive international connections. We've identified several overseas associates who might be interested in continuing his work. James felt familiar ice in his veins. Define continuing his work. Agent Jones spoke for the first time. 3 attempts to penetrate federal witness protection databases. 2 inquiries about your granddaughter's school records. 1 very expensive contract offered to certain international freelancers who specialize in family-oriented leverage. The words hit James like physical blows. He'd hoped the destruction of Pierce's network would end the threat permanently, but apparently some enemies were harder to kill than others. Current threat assessment? He asked. Low but persistent, Agent Smith replied. These are opportunists rather than organized revenge seekers. But money talks, and Pierce's overseas partners have deep pockets. What are you suggesting? Relocation, Agent Jones said immediately. Full witness protection, new identities, complete separation from your current life. It's the only way to guarantee your granddaughter's safety. James looked out the window at the playground where Jamie was kicking a soccer ball with fierce concentration, her auburn hair catching the afternoon sunlight. She'd made friends here, found her place in a community that accepted her grandfather as simply the quiet janitor who fixed things and never caused trouble. There has to be another option. Agent Smith shook his head. Mr. Summers, these people have resources that dwarf Pierce's operation. They've made it clear that they view you and your granddaughter as unfinished business. Then finish it. Excuse me. James turned from the window, and for just a moment, Agent Smith saw something in those gray eyes that made him unconsciously step backward. You want to eliminate a persistent threat? Give me 48 hours and a list of names. Sir, we can't authorize. You're not authorizing anything. I'm a private citizen with extensive overseas experience and very specific skill sets. What I do on my own time is my business. Agent Jones cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Summers, we're offering you a chance to disappear completely. New location, new identities, federal protection for the rest of your lives. And what kind of life would that be for her? James gestured toward the playground. Always moving, always watching over her shoulder, never able to form lasting relationships or feel safe anywhere. Alive, Agent Smith said bluntly. James considered this for a long moment. The agents were right, of course. Witness protection would keep Jamie physically safe, but it would also rob her of everything that made life worth living. No roots, no community, no sense of home or belonging. I need to think about this. Sir, we really need an answer today. 48 hours, James said in a tone that ended the discussion. I'll have an answer for you then. The agents exchanged glances but nodded. They left business cards with numbers that probably changed weekly and reminded James that time was a luxury he didn't have. After they left, James sat alone in Mrs. Patterson's office, staring at his reflection in the window. The face looking back at him was older than the one that had terrorized terrorists across 3 continents, lined with years of peaceful civilian life. But the eyes were the same, the cold, calculating gaze of a predator who'd learned to hide among sheep. That afternoon, he picked Jamie up from her after-school art club, as usual. She chattered about a clay sculpture she was making, a family of elephants that looked super realistic, according to her friend Emma. James listened with the attention such important news deserved, but part of his mind was already calculating international flight schedules and considering weapons caches he'd left hidden in 3 different countries. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Jamie looked up at him with those serious green eyes that saw too much. You're thinking about the old days again, aren't you? James paused in cutting vegetables for their salad. What makes you say that? You get that look, like you're somewhere else, somewhere dangerous. Sometimes the past doesn't want to stay buried, kiddo. Jamie nodded with the gravity of someone much older than 9. Are the bad guys coming back? James knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. Maybe, but if they do, I'll handle it. Do we have to move again? The question pierced him more deeply than any enemy bullet ever had. Jamie had been 3 when her parents died, for when she'd come to live with him in Montana. This house, this school, this community, it was the only stable home she'd ever known. I don't know yet, sweetheart, but whatever happens, we'll face it together. Jamie threw her arms around his neck in a fierce hug that smelled of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. I don't want to leave, Grandpa Joe. I like it here. My friends are here. I know, baby. I like it here, too. That night, after Jamie was asleep, James sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and began making lists. On one side, he wrote down everything that tied them to this life. Jamie's friends, her school, the community that had accepted them, the peaceful routine that had given him 8 years of healing from the wounds of war. On the other side, he listed the threats that would follow them regardless of where they went. Pierce's overseas partners with their deep pockets, and long memories. International criminals who viewed his granddaughter as leverage against the man who destroyed their carefully constructed network. The endless cycle of revenge that defined so much of the shadow world he'd left behind. At the bottom of the page, he wrote a single question: how do you kill ghosts? The answer came to him as he watched the sunrise paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and amber. You didn't kill ghosts by running from them. You killed them by becoming something more dangerous than they were. James Summers, the grandfather, couldn't protect Jamie from international criminals with unlimited resources. But the ghost could. By noon, he'd made his decision. James called Admiral Cox from a secure phone. "Sir, I need operational support for one final mission." "Ghost, what's the situation?" "Pierce's overseas partners are making moves against my granddaughter. I need 48 hours, a clean passport, and transportation to 3 specific countries." And then the ghost disappears forever. But this time, he takes all the monsters with him. Cox was quiet for several long moments. "What about Jamie?" "She stays here, under federal protection, living the normal life she deserves. When I come back, I'll just be her grandfather again. No more shadows, no more threats, no more ghosts from the past." "You sure about this?" James looked out the window at Riverside Elementary, where his granddaughter was attending classes and learning about fraction and reading stories about brave princesses and distant kingdoms. "Some battles you fight to win, sir. Others you fight to end." "Understood. How soon do you need to move?" "Tonight." That afternoon, James picked Jamie up from school for what might be the last time in weeks. But instead of sadness, he felt something approaching peace. This was his choice, his battle, his responsibility. Jamie would be safe. That's all that mattered. Everything else was just details for the ghost to handle. And ghosts, James had learned, were very good at making problems disappear. The war was almost over. One last mission, and then he could come home to be just a grandfather who read bedtime stories and helped with homework. Some prices were worth paying for peace. Epilogue. After the storm. 6 weeks later, James returned to Montana on a commercial flight from Frankfurt, carrying a battered duffel bag and the kind of exhaustion that came from completing missions that would never appear in any official record. The passport in his pocket identified him as David Parker, a mining consultant returning from overseas projects, but the face in the customs photo was unmistakably his own. Admiral Cox met him at the airport, their conversation limited to carefully neutral pleasantries until they were alone in the car. "It's finished," Cox asked as they drove through Billings toward Millbrook. "Finished," James confirmed. "Pierce's overseas partners won't be bothering anyone again. Neither will the freelancers they hired or the middlemen who brokered the contracts." "How many?" 11 total. 3 countries, 14 days. James stared out the window at familiar Montana landscape rolling past. The last one was in Prague. He begged at the end, offered to call off the contracts, pay compensation, anything to avoid what he knew was coming. "What did you tell him?" "That some debts can only be paid in blood." Cox nodded. They drove in silence for several miles before he spoke again. "The girl's been asking about you every day. Federal Protection Team says she's adapted well to having bodyguards, thinks it's all very exciting." James almost smiled. "She would. Did she ask why I was gone so long?" "Told her you were helping some old friends with a difficult problem." Not technically a lie. They reached Millbrook as the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the small town in warm golden light that made everything look like a postcard from a simpler America. James felt something tight in his chest loosening as they passed familiar landmarks. The diner where he and Jamie ate breakfast on Saturdays, the hardware store where he bought supplies for home repair projects, the small park where they fed ducks and talked about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Home. The word had real meaning now. The Federal Protection Team was discreet but thorough. Unmarked cars positioned at strategic points around the neighborhood, surveillance equipment hidden in utility boxes and streetlights, agents posing as neighbors and utility workers. It would have been invisible to civilian eyes, but James cataloged every detail with professional appreciation. "She's at the Patterson's house," Cox explained as they parked in James's driveway. Thought it would be better for the reunion to happen in familiar surroundings. James nodded, shouldering his duffel bag and walking toward the house next door. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, but inside he felt something approaching terror. 6 weeks away from Jamie was the longest separation they'd had since her parents died. What if she'd changed? What if the violence he'd committed in dark corners of the world had somehow stained him in ways she could see? Mrs. Patterson answered the door with a warm smile and immediately stepped aside. She's been watching for you all afternoon. Go on in. Jamie was sitting at the Pattersons' kitchen table, bent over what looked like a science project involving colored water and test tubes. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her face transformed with the kind of joy that made everything he'd done in Prague and Geneva and Mumbai seem worthwhile. Grandpa Joe. She launched herself into his arms with enough force to stagger him backward, wrapping her legs around his waist and her arms around his neck in a hug that felt like absolution. She'd grown in 6 weeks, taller, her face slightly more mature, but still unmistakably his granddaughter. I missed you so much, she whispered into his ear. The bodyguards are cool, but they don't know how to make hot chocolate right. James held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. I miss you too, kiddo. More than you can imagine. Did you solve the problem? With your old friends? Yes. It's all taken care of now. She pulled back to study his face with those serious green eyes that seemed to see everything. You look tired. I am tired, but I'm home now. For good. For good. That night, after Jamie was asleep in her own bed in their own house, James sat on his front porch and called Admiral Cox one final time. Sir, requesting permission to go completely dark. No more missions. No more favors. No more ghosts from the past. Granted, Ghost. You've earned your peace. Copy that. James Summers is signing off. He powered down the secure phone and removed the battery, ending his last official connection to the world he'd left behind. Tomorrow he would return the phone to Cox's people and resume his life as a custodial engineer at Riverside Elementary. But tonight, he simply sat in the darkness and listened to the sounds of his granddaughter sleeping safely in the house behind him. No more international criminals with deep pockets. No more corrupt officials with political protection. No more contracts on the lives of innocent children. The ghost was finally, truly dead. In the distance, he could see lights in the federal protection vehicles, agents maintaining vigilance against threats that would never come. He'd let them keep their watch for a while longer, until everyone was convinced the danger had passed. Then they too would fade away, leaving only a grandfather and his granddaughter to live the quiet life they'd built together. James closed his eyes and felt something he hadn't experienced since his wife died 12 years ago. Complete peace. No nightmares waiting in the darkness. No hypervigilance scanning for threats that might never come. Just the deep, restful calm of a man who'd finally found his way home. Monday morning would bring custodial duties and homework help and soccer practice. Tuesday would bring parent-teacher conferences and science projects and bedtime stories. The weeks and months and years would unfold with the beautiful predictability of ordinary life. And somewhere in the mountains of Montana, a 9-year-old girl would grow up safe and loved, never knowing that her grandfather had once been the most feared sniper in special operations history. She would know only that he made perfect hot chocolate, helped with difficult math problems, and told the best bedtime stories in the world. That was enough. That was everything. The war was over. The warrior had finally come home. And home, James discovered, was exactly where he belonged.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.